Imagine that something was just not right with your health. But when seeking help, you're told by one doctor after another that everything is normal. You might start to think you were imagining things, but the symptoms are still there. Risa August is a girl with sparkles in her hair and an Ironman athlete. She had noticed subtle changes to her body that she couldn't quite explain. Her shoes weren't fitting. She had little shifts in her facial features. Yet doctor after doctor missed these innocuous physical changes that were really signs of a rare and debilitating condition stemming from a hidden tumor at the base of her brain. In this honest and eye-opening interview, Risa shares the 8-year-long process of finally getting a diagnosis, how she lost the will to live and then made a decision to manage her chronic illness. That heroic decision has transformed her perspective on life, mortality, and what it means to be truly resilient. As an award-winning author, speaker, Gestalt practitioner, and patient advocate, Risa has learned and practiced removing limiting beliefs, shifting her perspective, and in this interview, she reveals how embracing an expansive life can produce a life unleashed. Hello, and welcome to Hero Up, the podcast that inspires and challenges you to step up and become heroic in all areas of your life. I'm your host, Tony Stark Polici, and it's my goal to give you practical, actionable advice and insights into copywriting, mindset, lifestyle, and impact. On this show, we'll explore how to create compelling and persuasive marketing messages, and I'll give you clever tips to make you stand out as a hero. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a freelancer, a coach, or a creative, this podcast is for you. So, let's dive in. Just heard the incredible introduction to my guest today, and this is going to be an exciting interview. Risa, I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you so much for being here.
So grateful to be here, Tony. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, well, I want to get started just by asking you the simple question. How do you describe yourself today? Who are you and what do you do?
I'm excited to share that I'm now an award-winning author. I never expected that to be one of the things I'd be mentioning today, but that feels extremely exciting and I'm super proud of it. I've also become a speaker and patient advocate for rare pituitary tumors. And I'm also a Gestalt practitioner or coach, if you will, on the side.
Yeah, so I'm going to start kind of at the beginning of your life before we get into this amazing story that you have. So what were you like as a kid? Were you like the nerdy outcast? Were you the popular girl? What was little Risa like?
Oh, gosh, that's a great question. I was super adventurous and I was inspired by the Indiana Jones movies. I loved being out on digs and playing in the dirt and our little creek that ran behind our house and going on adventures. I was also very compassionate child. I cared a lot for people, and I was the type of kid that didn't make fun of other kids or tease other kids, and I didn't go along with other people doing that either. And unfortunately, sometimes that did put me on the fringes. I wanted to be friends with everyone and I wanted everyone to get along. I had a fairly dysfunctional upbringing in my household, and I remember as a child, I just wanted peace and harmony. And yeah, so that's a great question.
Yeah, so I can relate to that too. I tended to, and today I still am kind of a peacemaker, although I can have a tendency to get in there and really be very blunt with people and get in people's faces when I feel like I need to. But ultimately, I want everybody to like me and I want people to get along. I don't like to create, division and lack of unity. So maybe there's some of that commonality there with the dysfunction that, that growing up with makes you want to not have chaos in other areas of your life.
Definitely.
When did you get the, you've become a badass athlete. When did your passion for sports and endurance stuff begin?
I remember in my early 20s, I think as soon as I turned 21, I dropped out of college because I had always wanted a degree in archaeology, but I was pressured into a business management degree. And I was very unhappy. I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy being in college. I was also putting myself through college, working full time, and it became too much. And so I dropped out after about 2 years, and that kind of began a traveling journey for me. And that's when my whole world opened up. I left my hometown and started experiencing all the different things the world has to offer. And it wasn't until about 10 years later where I seriously woke up one morning and I said, I'm going to go back to school. Kind of got like all the traveling and adventure out of my system. And I don't know if I was ready to kind of be more grounded or stationary, but I was like, I'm going to go back to college and finish my degree in geography. And I also started looking at other parts of my life. And I got a part-time job at a swimming pool at like a YMCA or a recreation center. Yeah. And I would see these athletes coming in just swimming for like, I don't know, it seemed like hours. And I finally stopped one of the swimmers and I said, what are you training for? And they said, oh, a triathlon. And I was very curious. And he said, you should get he's like, do you know how to swim and run? I'm like, oh, yeah. He's like, well, you should get yourself a bike and try one. And that was kind of the onset of I did my first sprint triathlon and I was hooked. And that was kind of the start of, I had this whole mindset of like whole body health, like physically, emotionally, mentally. I was kind of stepping into this new phase in my life. And so fitness became a big part of that.
So did you say you traveled for, was it 10 years?
It was about 10 years where I would find work in different countries or different states throughout the US. And I might work there anywhere from a few months to a couple years. And then I finally, like I said, I was working for an environmental center guiding wilderness trips, and the season was coming to a close. And I just remember thinking, like, is this what I want? Is this what I want to continue doing? And I felt really insecure about not having a degree. That really weighed on me, like that I never finished that thing in my life. I have a whole different perspective on that now looking back, but back then I felt really insecure about it. So I just remember waking up thinking, I'm going to go back to school. And maybe in some way I felt, and maybe that'll give me some insight on where I'm going next, like what I want to do. And so that's what I did. I was living in Maine at the time. I packed up my car because at that time, everything fit in my car that I owned. And I went back to Ohio where I started college, and I went back to the same college to finish my degree.
Excellent. So this is like you're 30 years old now, close to 30 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, prior to this, I didn't hear you mention any of this, but was there a lot of athleticism during the travel? Was there a lot of hiking? Were you doing any kind of endurance or training or fitness during all this time when you were traveling?
Oh, gosh, yes. I got really into backpacking, mountaineering, cross-country skiing, canoeing, whitewater or ocean kayaking. Again, I became a wilderness guide and guided, backpack trips and canoe trips and things like that. We'd be out in like 3 weeks at a time out in the wilderness. And I guess I never looked at that as athleticism, but it's just a different form of it. So yeah.
Very active lifestyle, very active. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so as a 20-something-year-old, you're out taking groups of people out for 3 weeks at a time, camping, teaching them about surviving in the wilderness, all of these different things. And you said your degree is in geography.
Mm-hmm.
So you're studying. So you're very interested in topographical stuff, plants, the animals, nature, different. Did you teach them how to what to eat in the wilderness? Like if you're stranded out here, you can get water here, you can get food here.
Well, I certainly wasn't a Bear Grylls or anything, but but we did do some of that. We taught people about the plants and nature. And for example, one of my gigs was a ridge runner in Baxter State Park in northern Maine. And so I'd run from peak to peak all day, and one for safety, but also educating people about the fragile alpine tundra, flora and fauna, on the top of the mountain. And so, yeah, there was definitely an educational piece there as well. I lived in Australia for a while, also teaching earth and education and stuff like that. So there was a mix of all of it, but I wouldn't say intense, like some of those intense shows out there, like Naked and Afraid. It wasn't anything like that.
Yeah. So you mentioned this ridge runner thing. What is a ridge runner? You spend all day long running back and forth between 2 mountain peaks?
3 mountain peaks. Yes. So, and that was in Baxter State Park. So Mount Katahdin, which is the terminus of the Appalachian Trail. And then there's, I believe it was South Peak, if my memory serves me well, and Pamola Peak. And I would just run across all 3 all day. 1, for safety. 2, to check in with through hikers and other hikers. Not everyone was a through hiker or an Appalachian Trail hiker. And again, for safety, like I had to be the last one off the mountains. So I had to make sure everyone else was off the mountain and I'd be the last one down. And I would also take like weather readings and all kinds of things.
Wow. That sounds like a really adventurous job. I mean,
it was. And I was super fit. During that time for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So you come from this period being you're like super fit. Now you're swimming. You get this idea from one of these guys, about doing a triathlon. Did you immediately start training for one?
Well, I hadn't had a bike in years. I think since junior high when I had my blue 10 speed, so I was like, where do I get a bike? And I knew my friend had a mountain bike. And I was like, can I borrow this? And it was it was way too big for me. I hadn't been on a bike in years. And he was like, sure, borrow it, use it as long as you want. And so I did my first triathlon on an oversized mountain bike and had no clue about anything, totally cramped. Coming in from the bike ride, but finished nonetheless. And it was truly such an exciting feeling to cross that finish line, for sure.
Yeah, I bet. So how many of those did you do before we're going to talk about the shift that you had in your life, but how many did you do, from that point forward? Is it something you continued?
Oh gosh, yes. I can't even begin to count how many I did. I started signing up for every series I could. I started lengthening my distances. So I'd move from sprint to Olympic distance to half Ironman distance. And then finally full Ironman was like, that was my goal, to get to the full Ironman triathlon distance. And it took several years to get there. It wasn't like, boom, all of a sudden, June, I'm doing a sprint, and then August, I'm doing an Ironman. No way. But it took years of kind of getting up to that.
And along the way, you got married, like had lots of life things happen. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yep. I got married in my early 30s, and my husband at the time he was very adventurous. He was a skydiver and base jumper and mountain biker and skier and bow hunter and fly fisherman. Like he was kind of the same as far as liking adventure and outdoors.
Okay, so you're living this very active life. You're in great shape. Lots of outdoor activity, lots of vigorous, competitive kind of stuff. And then the shift happens. Like, when did you start having health issues? And what was the first sign that something wasn't right?
It was after my first Ironman race, actually. I completed my first Ironman race, and it was like within a year following that. So completed my Ironman race, and then I'm like, okay, what next? And my friend invited me on a 500-mile cycling journey the next summer around Oregon, and I was like, oh, that sounds awesome. Like I wanted to do the next thing. And so I began noticing changes in my body. Like first it was very physical changes, like extreme weight gain and pain and fatigue. And there were other things going on that I didn't associate with, my condition until looking back. For example, I had braces a couple times. I had to have braces put back on, and I didn't know down the line that was going to connect to my disease. But so there was all kinds of kind of strange, odd things going on. And I kept being dismissed by doctors. And then I kept trying to find ways to maybe dismiss them or explain them away myself. So that's kind of where it started.
Having read some of your story, I know you went from being this Ironman athlete to
barely being able to get out of bed, right? So we're going to get into a little bit of what happened here, but you had this transition and you said you kept being dismissed by doctors. What was the lowest point during this process? And did you ever just feel hopeless, like giving up?
Yeah, I think the lowest point, reflecting back, I think the lowest point for me was one, I actually joined OA, Overeaters Anonymous.
Yeah.
Because I thought, okay, if the doctors say my blood work's fine and there's nothing wrong with me, I must be doing something wrong. So I was putting myself on strict diets. I had more hair growth, like on my arms and stuff. And I was like, oh, that's my Romanian heritage. I started really thinking, I feel myself getting a little emotional around this, but I started feeling like, okay, maybe I'm hypochondriac. Maybe there's nothing wrong with me and I'm just making it up, or it's in my head, or I'm the cause of it. And so I don't know if I would have looked at it as a low point, but I really felt like, okay, this is be me. It must be me.
Yeah, that sounds really painful when I listen to you, because I think that there's probably a lot of people listening to this right now who have gone through something similar or may be going through it right now, where they're second guessing themselves. It's like, we go to these people that we consider the experts, right? And I know from reading your book that you have always had a very strong intuitive sense of self, of like being in connection with your body. And so you knew something wasn't right, but you couldn't figure out what. And you're going to these experts who are saying everything's fine, everything's good. But intuitively, that's not right. So I think the questions I would start asking myself, and I have done some of this in my own life, is, am I crazy? Is there something wrong with me? No. Am I generating this? No, because we know that the impact of the brain and what we think, right? The kind of thoughts that we have, and we'll talk about your limiting belief perspective and how you work with people with that. But it's like, I know that I can impact the way that I feel by the way that I think. And it's almost like if you're somewhere and somebody says, oh, I've got ants on me, and suddenly they're covered in ants, and you start to feel like, are they on me too? So there's a little bit of the mind impacting that, but the frustration that I think we feel when we go to these experts and they just can't find anything and nothing gets any better. It sounds painful to me as I listen to that was a very difficult time. So eventually you go to doctor after doctor after doctor. You're continuing to figure this out, going to Overeaters Anonymous for a problem you didn't have, but you find somebody, this amazing woman who didn't stick to the script, right?
Yes, but not before I finally found my voice. And I fast forward 7 years and I decided I was going to train for another Ironman race. And after that Ironman race that I barely got through, and then I could barely get off the couch after the race, again, started looking at adrenal fatigue and the HPA axis. And there's even something called post-Ironman depression. I started looking at things, and then I started noticing severe headaches. Severe headaches. I was barely sleeping a couple hours a night. They were so bad. Kept drinking more water because I was told I was dehydrated and overtraining and I need to drink more water. And these headaches would never go away. So I finally went into my primary care doctor's office and said, hey, I never come to the doctor, but I feel like something's wrong and I'd love to get an MRI. And she is like, nope. I don't think you need one. Your blood work's fine. We've tested it several times. And I'm like, no, I think I'd just like to rule it out. Rule anything out. Hope to God nothing's wrong. No, I don't think you need one. And besides, they're expensive. And old Risa was about to just say, okay, I trust you. You're the one making the call. But something in me I don't know if it was divine intervention or someone on my side that day, that I just said, order me the MRI. And 1 week later, I was told I had an enlarged pituitary, go see an endocrinologist. And I had no idea what that meant. And so then I meet my endocrinologist, and she was fabulous, just super compassionate, like actively listening to me, facing me, looking me in the eye when we're talking. And then suddenly she's pointing to a computer screen and there's my skull And right in between the eyeballs is a big gray blob. And she's like, this has to come out. And furthermore, I'm 99% sure I know what you have. And that explained all these symptoms I was having. Extreme weight gain, the hair growth, the bone changes, the braces. And I remember thinking, I wasn't even thinking about brain surgery, that I had to have brain surgery. I was like, oh my God, you mean, and here I'm getting emotional again. So you mean to tell me I'm not crazy? She's like, you're not crazy. And I just lost it.
Yeah.
I just felt so validated in that moment.
So, okay, take me back to a little bit of some of the symptoms that you went through, some of the things that you struggled with over those years when you see your body changing, so that anybody that may be experiencing some of these symptoms, because on the one hand, we're going to get to the name of what you were diagnosed with here, but on the one hand, that's said to be kind of a rare disease. But on the other hand, it's really not so rare. It's just, it's not diagnosed, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of those symptoms. What are the physical things you went through?
Yes. And they can certainly vary from person to person. But for me, it was extreme weight gain, like 40 pounds, despite...
You're like a super active person, right?
Very active, very stringent with my diet. And the weight gain is almost like an all-over puffiness. It's like rings don't fit because my fingers are so puffy. My shoes don't fit. I had to constantly get bigger shoes. I had to constantly buy newer clothes and bigger sizes. And so for me, that was the big thing, that because the puffiness feels like a gluten or sodium overdose, like, that uncomfortable feeling you have of maybe after a night of having a few drinks or eating too much, I don't know, food that had sodium in it or something, but it's like extreme. And again, I had braces a couple times. The hair on my arms became thicker and coarser, and severe headache was one. And I started noticing, I got really into weightlifting and CrossFit. So I started noticing really kind of unusual joint pain, not your typical like, oh, I must have done something funny. It was unusual joint pain. And I'm not even sure how to better articulate that. But that was a few of my symptoms. And another symptom is sleep apnea is another one, maybe excessive snoring. I don't think I had that, but I know a lot of people do. And then there's other things that go on inside your body as well that once you are diagnosed, you have to get checked for. So like polyps on your colon and an enlarged heart, and so I have to have like echocardiograms done and things like that. So it really varies from patient to patient. But for me, that was a lot of what I was dealing with.
Wow. Okay. So when you're sitting here with this endocrinologist that says she thinks she knows what's going on, and then she gave it a name, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's acromegaly. Is that the term?
Acromegaly, yes, and bravo for being able to pronounce that, because I think it took me a couple weeks before. Wait a minute, can you say that again? Yes, acromegaly. Yeah. And
so it's always caused by a tumor in the particular spot in the brain, or? Yeah.
So what's believed to be more common than we realize is tumors on the pituitary gland or pituitary tumor, and they can cause, I think it's into the hundreds of different kind of diseases that impact your hormones, and your hormones impact everything that happens in your body. And so I happen to have the disease associated with the tumor called acromegaly. So, and mine is, acromegaly is where excessive amounts of growth hormone are dumped into your body, and it's like lethal doses.
So had you not found this doctor, I mean, your foreseeable future would have been, this would have caused your death?
Yes.
Were they able to operate on the tumor?
So I went and opted for surgery, and they got out as much as they could. There's some residual tumor wrapped around my carotid artery and close to my optic nerve, and they don't mess with either one of those.
Yeah.
But you don't know how the surgery went until you have to wait about 3 months following surgery till everything heals up. And then you get another MRI to see how successful the surgery was. And because it takes so long to find these tumors, oftentimes the outcome is similar to mine, where it's grown into this area that houses your carotid artery. It's called the cavernous sinus, and it becomes inoperable. But unfortunately, it's still doing its job, dispensing the growth hormone and causing the rare disease acromegaly. So then the treatment continues to get that under control so that I could, or anyone could continue on and live a longer life.
So if a tumor is inoperable, and you may not know the answer to this, but I'll ask you anyway, then is there a protocol that can help counteract the effects of what's happening to the pituitary gland?
So I have the option to go on for radiation treatment or skip radiation treatment and try different medications. Some of the medications control the growth hormone output, and some of them attack the tumor and essentially shrink it. There's no guarantees with radiation treatment or medications working. I eventually, after some reluctance and after initially saying no, I eventually opted for radiation treatment, which could take about 10 years to start seeing the effects of. So in the meantime, I'm on medication or trying to find medications that work for me. And I've been on multiple medications at this point. And it sounds like I'm a bit of an anomaly. We're not finding one that's quite working. The one I'm on now seems to be working so far. So fingers crossed there. Some people find a medication right off the bat and it works great for them. And that's what they're on the rest of their life. So similar stories from patient to patient, but very individual experience.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously you've been through hell with this acromegaly, but I'm going to ask you a little bit of a weird question.
Okay.
Now, what's the most embarrassing or awkward situation that you found yourself in before getting diagnosed?
Awkward or embarrassing? I don't know.
Yeah, so like this thing is causing stuff in your body. It's causing you to feel things. It's causing you to appear differently. There's obviously, it's hitting your hormones, impacting the way that you look, maybe the way that your skin was. I don't know. You say braces. I'm guessing that was because your teeth were changing.
Yeah.
You talked about excessive hair growth on your arms. Was there anything that you found yourself in this situation and you were like, yeah, this is just weird, or this is just embarrassing,
Oh, yeah.
Hell.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, that helps. So yeah, a bunch of that was embarrassing. I wouldn't say the most embarrassing thing in the world, but there were several things. I was a little embarrassed about the hair growth on my body, and I was, the oldest person in the orthodontist's office, and I started noticing this big bony lump growing out of the side of my head. And so I would get embarrassed when I'd go get my hair cut, and you know how they shampoo your head and they rub it and massage it. And I would kind of feel self-conscious about that bony lump. And then of course, I think I'm a 9.5 or 10 shoe size now. I was always a 7.5, growing up. So it's just things like that could easily made me feel insecure, I guess. And that's a big part of this disease as well. There's not just the physical aspect of it. There's very much a mental aspect and challenge to it as well.
I can imagine, I raised 4 boys, and then I was blessed to get married a second time after my first marriage ended, but I got to raise stepdaughters. And holy cow, I really never understood the kind of pressure that are on girls versus boys, especially when it comes to, I don't know if stereotypes is the right term, but, one of my daughters has an issue with their feet. She thinks they're too big, and noses are too big, or boobs aren't big enough, or I'm too tall. There's just so much pressure already, societal pressure and peer pressure to look a certain way. But then everything that you described, would be something that I could totally see myself in as well. If I get a zit or something on my head and it's very prominent, I'm like, what the hell is that? And I don't want I don't want anyone to see it. And I know that's obviously there's something deep there behind that. But when somebody is struggling with something that is clearly looks different than everybody else, right? It's really easy to have those judgments like, oh, what are people going to think? And how do I look? And this is terrible. And also because it's not something you can control, right? This is just happening to you. And I think there's a sense of powerlessness as well as just embarrassment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I became insecure. I would study my face in the mirror and started noticing how the bone structures had changed in my face. And I even remember examining photos of me and my friends, and I was like, why am I like towering over them? Like, why do I look so big? I actually was pretty mean to myself. I'd say like, I look like an ogre next to them. And that's harsh. That's harsh. So there was a lot of healing through all of that. And now I'm fabulous. So I don't shifted my whole mindset around that. But man, it was definitely a struggle at first.
Somebody told me once, I think I shared with you that, I've got a lot of experience in recovery from addiction and trauma. And somebody told me once, if anybody treated you as bad as you treat yourself, I don't think you would stick around. And it really landed with me. And I think that's a very common thing that people can struggle with, actually we being kind and loving to ourselves. Now, of course, a lot of people are on the other end of that. They're way too full of themselves and don't really
I agree.
Perspective. But,
I agree. Yeah.
This beating ourselves up and being mean and self-deprecating is a terrible, terrible way to live. It's horribly painful. But if you could go back in time, because I'm thinking about this now, and tell your pre-diagnosed self one thing, what would it be? And do you think you would listen?
Gosh, there'd be a whole list of things. But I would, I feel some emotion around this too. What keeps coming to mind is just let go. And what I mean by that is I would try to control things in my environment so much. I would try to control the people in my lives. I had to have control of everything. I had to be the best at everything. I had to be perfect at everything. I had to know everything. So if someone knew a little bit about something, well, I knew a lot about it. And man, looking back, how exhausting. And so, just let go. Just, be happy. Sorry, I'm struggling to put it into words, but just allow. There's so many things. I can't narrow it down to one.
Well, what I'm hearing, and if this doesn't resonate with you, please let me know. But what I'm reading kind of between the lines here is find some acceptance and some self-love in this process.
Beautifully put. Yes.
It seems to be the hardest thing for me at times. So do you think that you would listen to that back then, or did you have to go through what you went through to get to the place where you're at now?
I definitely had to go through what I went through to get to where I am now. It's, and that's how, that's the gift in it. I wouldn't have. I would have been like, no way. You got to keep going, pushing harder, doing better. Like this forced me to stop and really look at my life and ask, is this working? Is all of this working? And so I really do feel like it was the silver lining, the gift. I feel I'm a better person for it.
Risa, at the beginning of our interview today, you mentioned that you had a dysfunctional family. And I'm wondering if you and I have something in common where part of that dysfunction was feeling like I always had to prove myself. I was never good enough. I was often degraded and demeaned and made fun of. My mother was a writer. She wrote books on how to teach kids to read by the phonetic method. And that was, like in the late 60s, early 70s, and they were still used, and they're probably still being used, but I know they were still being used widely up until 2012. So I was reading before I was in kindergarten. I was very articulate as a kid. And my mom passed away when I was 8, but my dad was one thing that just bugged the heck out of him because he was a hardworking Italian guy, had this hardworking ethic, but his education level was 8th grade, right? So for me, when I'd come in and I'd use a big word, that would just drive him crazy, You and your big words. You think you're so damn smart with your big words. And so here's my question. This controlling part of you, this desire to always be the best. Do you see any of that as a result of being in kind of a dysfunctional environment where you felt like you had to earn people's love or approval or anything?
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I had a narcissistic mother and an alcoholic father, and he loved me more than anything, but he loved his alcohol more. And as far as a narcissist, you can never please a narcissist. But as a child, I didn't know any of it. So I did what I would try to do, whatever it took. I would be the good kid, the best kid. I would get good grades and be polite and well-mannered and do all my chores and do right by people and not lie. And I mean, I really am, I should say, yes, partly a product of my upbringing. I would say those parts of me, for sure.
We're all a product of our upbringing. It's whether or not we're ever able to shift out of that and, and find a new way of being.
Yeah.
Right. And I think even, well, I can only speak for me, but even in the shifting that I've been able to do into new ways of being, there's always pieces of that product, the person that I was shaped that rear their ugly head and are continuing to be a struggle to be different. Let's talk about you've got this interesting friend, and I don't know how long this friend has been with you. And I'd like you to describe it because I don't want to make any judgments about what I think it is, but let's talk about Bubba. Who's Bubba?
Bubba is my tumor, my pituitary tumor. And he's probably been with me for decades, but his actions didn't become apparent until, 2011. And then it took 7 years again to discover him.
So when I read your book and heard about Bubba, at first I was thinking, so I refer to the part of myself that is that critical voice. I've got different names for these little characters that pop up in my life. It's kind of like a committee, right? Mm-hmm. I've got the cheerleaders and I've got the critic and I've got the representative. Mm-hmm. And some people may hear that and think, oh, the person's got mental issues. Well, so do you. But it's like I recognize these pieces of myself. And so I thought Bubba was, is Bubba, in addition to being this tumor, like the voice in your head that's telling you to do this and telling you to do that? So that's why I asked.
Yes. Well, I don't want to give too much away in case anyone wants to read my book. Right. Yeah. But I think the relationship evolved, from the time I decided to name him Bubba and to where we are now in my life. But yeah, I think I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay. That's great. I appreciate that. So let's talk about this amazing journey that you took. And it's, it's the basis for your book, The Road Unpaved. Tell me about what inspired you. First of all, what is it? What did you do? And what inspired you to take this epic bike ride?
Yes. Well, I remember, I think it was 6 months post brain surgery. I think I just completed my radiation treatment. I had 6 weeks of radiation treatment and I was still on the couch. And I remember specifically, I was wearing these tattered gray sweatpants that were all kind of worn out on the heels, at the bottom hem. And I was wearing a faded purple hoodie again for another day in a row. I hadn't left the house in months. I had no energy. I felt like I had no drive, nothing to look forward to. I had these big glass sliders in my house and I would look down at the driveway and see the mailbox and think, oh, okay, maybe I'll walk to the mailbox today. But then I wouldn't. And my husband at the time would ask if I'd want to go for a walk with the dogs. And I'd say maybe tomorrow. And I remember sitting there one night home alone in those same gray sweatpants. And I just said, this is no way to live. I need something to strive for, something to live for. And I remember having all these goals and ambitions before surgery. So why all of a sudden did I not feel like I had anything to live for. And so I pulled out that list, and I remember thinking, okay, I always wanted to ride my bike across the country. And I started looking at different bike routes and found the Pacific Coast bicycle route from Canada to Mexico. It's a 1,845-mile journey. And I said, that's the one. And that was the night I signed up to ride my bike down the Pacific Coast. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I didn't know how I was going to get off the couch, but something shifted there. And that bike ride became a metaphor for my life. And I wanted to live.
That's awesome. You know, one of the things that I am really passionate about with the Hero Up podcast is encouraging people to take action, to believe in the possibilities in their life, even if they don't know how they can make these things happen. And what you just said is so powerful, and I hope that people don't miss it, is there was this moment when you made a decision. And too often, many of us, like myself, I'm one of these people that I'm a controlling analyzer, depending on what kind of personality test you look at. But basically what that means is I like to have all my ducks in a row whenever possible, and I overthink the hell out of things, right? And when I'm doing things best and when I'm operating in my area of genius, it's when I'm able to make a decision and then figure out how to get it done afterwards, right? Like, I'm going to do this. I don't know how, but I'm going to do this. And that is what I'm hearing. It's like, this was a moment where you made a decision, and that decision is what created the momentum and the actions that transformed your life. Is that accurate?
Yes, absolutely. And it was a process. It wasn't, I had like 14 months to train for this thing. And so it wasn't like all of a sudden I got on my bike the next day and I was full steam ahead. No, I didn't get on my bike for a couple months after that. And I started researching the heck out of it. I started trying to figure out, okay, how would I manage my medication on this trip? And I actually started, what I knew was I had to actually get off the couch, but I couldn't physically get on my bike yet. So I actually started painting.
Huh.
I started painting, and I don't consider myself an artist, but before I knew it, I was selling art pieces around the world. But my point there is that was the first step, was like, okay, I can't do this, but what can I do? Well, I can get off this effing couch, get out of these disgusting tattered gray sweatpants and start living. And so, I feel myself getting emotional again, but and that's what I did. And so I started thinking of all the things I wanted to do. Like I said, I looked at that bucket list and those goals and ambitions and dance classes I've always wanted to take, and art classes and trips I've always wanted to do. I really started looking at my life and thinking, okay, let's live.
That's fantastic. I think that we have two lists. Most people have two lists. We may not know it. There's a bucket list, which is all of the things that we want to do and want to achieve and our dreams and our goals. And then there's a fuck it list. And that's the list where you put everything that we may have had on our bucket list, but just decide to give up on. Like, I can't do this. I'm not going to do this. I'm not even going to try. And I want to stay off of that list, right? I want to lean into the bucket list. I want to lean into the possibilities. I want to make the most of every day, every minute, every hour that I have, because they're gifts. They're really a gift. Now, it's easy to say that. It takes intention, and it takes courage and persistence. And sometimes we fall down time and time again on our process. But, the fact that you had this vision and you said, enough is enough, or at least I judge that's the point that you got to. This is nowhere to live, you said. No way to live. And so I'm hoping that, as people are listening to this, that they think about, what have I put on that bucket list, in my life that maybe needs to get moved over? Gets moved back to, what did I give up on?
Yes. I love that so much. Oh my God. Like, because now that you're saying that, riding my bike across country was probably on the bucket list. Finally writing my book was probably on the bucket list. And there's probably a ton of things that were on that bucket list. And I moved them over to the bucket list.
Yeah.
And I'm checking them off left and right. And it's flipping awesome.
That is awesome. Yeah. And so I don't want to go too much into your book because it's an amazing story. And I got to tell you, I haven't finished your book. I shared that with you. I was transparent about that. But I am so, as a copywriter and a writer myself and a ghostwriter, like this is not new to me. But I'm reading your book and I'm just loving it, right? The imagery and the storytelling, it's a wonderful book. So everyone listening, I got to tell you, you're going to love this book. You're going to love this story that Risa takes you through on this bike ride. So I'm going to ask you one thing, and if you answer in the book, then you can decline this question because maybe I just haven't run into it. But I know that there was a moment on that bike ride where you said, "What the hell am I doing?" Was there only one, or did you have other moments where you wanted to quit? And if so, what kept you going?
Definitely more than one. What kept me going? I don't know if I outright answered this in the book. I think it's just that desire to live life on my terms. I think I stayed open to what was possible. I shifted perspective and just opening myself up to unlimited possibilities.
That's great. So you've faced all these things. You've gone through the struggle. You're still in the process of healing. Do you feel more fearless now, or are there still things that scare the crap out of you?
What I have the most fear around is, am I capable of doing that and physically? And then I have to have a talk with Bubba and be like, oh, hell no. You're not stopping me. And so one of those things were doing the Camino de Santiago in Spain. I was like, oh, I don't know if I could physically do that. And I started thinking of all the reasons I shouldn't. And typically it's a pilgrimage you hike, but I couldn't physically hike. Like I couldn't physically hike it anymore without severe pain. So I thought, but I could do it on my bike. And so I stayed open to that. Okay, like that shifting my perspective. Okay, how I want to do this. I can't do it that way, but how, maybe I can do it this way. And so again, it was just staying open. And so I have to say though, on that trip, I definitely had some fearful moments and crazy. And it might be in my next book. It most likely will be in my next book. But then that's when you got to dig deep, when you have those moments of fear and find that place of calm and acceptance, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if that answered your question, but.
Well, I wanted to know if you felt fearless or if there's things that scare the crap out of you. I'm always looking for somebody who says I'm fearless because I'd like to know how they got there, because I'm not. I would like to be, but I'm not. And so, yeah, I mean, that was an honest answer. Thank you very much. I want to talk about, you're also a Gestalt practitioner, right? And for people that don't know what that is, do you want to explain it, or should I tell them to go Google it?
Yes. Sorry, I was still like kind of thinking about the fearless thing and the fearless.
If you're not done there, we can go back to it.
Well, I find it a fascinating topic. I think it's not a matter of being fearless, but what do you do in those moments of having fear? Like, what do you do with it? And how do you overcome it and conquer it? I actually do have moments of fear, but I have really learned to overcome, like conquer the fear when I'm in those moments.
How do you do that?
I think it's a matter of going inward and digging deep and almost dissecting the fear. Where is it coming from? And does it really have the power I believe it has over me? Or am I creating that? And so I think a lot of times it's asking those questions and dissecting the fear. And then you really get a hard look at it and you're like, oh, that's all it is? Okay, moving on.
I've been involved in this men's work for a number of years, more than a decade now. And I lead a group and I work with 4 and 5 different core emotions. And I'm like, these are the emotions. You go into some therapist's office and they got a list of 114 different emotions on the wall, which is overwhelming to a guy like me and is overwhelming to most men. But fear is one of the primary ones. And there's a definition behind it. And it is, I will get hurt. It's this belief that I'm going to be hurt. And I believe that all fear stems from that thought. And so when you talk about dissecting, when I'm feeling fear and I go, okay, what am I thinking is going to hurt me? What's going to hurt me about this?
Mm.
And then I can identify that. And then I can say, is that true? And if it is, what are the outcomes? What can I do about it? Is that not true? It's not true. Okay, then this is invalid. I don't need to pay attention to this. My mind's making this up. So I think that going inward is really important, at least for me, when I'm experiencing any kind of emotion that maybe is uncomfortable, or even ones that are not uncomfortable.
Right.
Because emotions are indicators. And I think too often people think that emotions are like the truth. So I feel sad, therefore I am a sad person. I feel mad, therefore I am an angry person. And they're indicators of something that I'm thinking, something that's happening, maybe something that I'm putting myself through. So your description of just going inward and kind of dissecting things really made me think about how important it is to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, everything you said beautifully. And that's a great segue into Gestalt practices or the Gestalt modality. It's a very holistic approach to coaching or therapy. And it's all about taking the pieces and parts of an individual and putting them back together so that the individual becomes whole again. And it's a very holistic and probably non-traditional or experiential approach to coaching or therapy. And Gestalt believes that the individual has the answers within them. Mm. And, for example, as a practitioner, I'm not there to give the answer. Even if it's clear to me or I believe I know the answer, it's not my job to do that. It's to guide the client to finding the answer on their own. And with my guidance, of course.
Have you ever had a breakthrough with a client that made you just break down and cry right there in the session?
Me break down and cry?
Yeah, or maybe afterwards.
I certainly have had moments where I had tears, or I wouldn't say full-on cry. I've done practice coaching with colleagues where we certainly did. I think within my practice, I try to stay solid for the other person, for my client. And I very much see it as a coactive approach as well. I don't know everything. I definitely don't know everything. And I'm not here to push an agenda or give you the answers. But man, oh man, I'm going to support you and guide you and do the best I can to help get you to that place of healing.
I only know a little bit about Gestalt. I know I've done empty chair work in the past, probably a few other modalities, but like if we played armchair psychologist here for a minute and I asked you, do you think that your drive to take on these extreme physical challenges is a way of proving something to yourself or to others?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually up for me right now. As a child, all we want is our parents' love, right? And I felt like that was lacking in my childhood and growing up. But if I did everything perfect and I kept being the best at everything and doing more and more and getting that kind of acknowledgement and affirmation, like maybe that's what I associated with love or acceptance. I don't know, but yes, absolutely. And I'm actually, working through that right now in my life, in my adult years. I'm looking at, okay, is this what I want to do? Or is this old patterns? Do I feel like I have to do this? Sorry, I'm making this a long answer, but yes, absolutely.
I like your long answer. My experience has been that in my life, as I've aged, I step into those kinds of questions and self-examination myself. Like, why am I doing this? What am I doing this for? What is underneath all this? It's important to ask these things.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wish I would have asked them sooner. So I hope that by talking about them on this podcast and other places in my life, that maybe, somebody can pick up on those things 20 or 30 years sooner and maybe make a shift. And speaking of a shift, I feel like you've kind of reinvented yourself as this Risa Unleashed, right? What I found on your website. But what parts of yourself did you have to leave behind in order to reinvent yourself? Are there any parts that you miss?
I certainly had to leave I wouldn't say the athlete, but the extreme athlete behind. I'm not capable of doing, not that I'm not doing hard things still, but doing as hard of things as I used to. The perfectionist, the need to be perfect and always on time and not make any mistakes. I had to leave all that behind. I struggle now because of radiation treatment and some of the medications I'm on. I struggle with some cognitive stuff. My memory isn't so great. I used to be the person that remembered everything. I had my own wedding and event planning company, and so I was every bit of detailed and organized as a event planner would be. I no longer, or let's say I make way more mistakes now and very forgetful. I think sometimes as far as missing things, I struggle with that a little bit of like, I still get down on myself when I make a mistake. Like, oh gosh, I can't believe I forgot that. And I have moments of being in the gym and going from being one of the strongest women in the gym to the weakest, as opposed to just acknowledging, hey, I fucking showed up today. But I really love who I'm becoming. And it's a constant evolution. And I become more and more humble and patient and accepting the older I get. And I realize the older I get, the less I know. And I never want to stop learning. So I really love this version of me.
You're into some pretty wild or cool stuff now. I mean, salsa dancing, aerial silks. Do you still do that?
I don't still do that, but I did take a class and tried that for a while. And then I was like, okay, on to the next thing. Okay. And I got really into indoor skydiving for a while. And
that's kind of a blast.
It's a blast, especially when you start actually getting the hang of it.
Yeah.
And boxing classes is a great way to let out some aggression. And I still go to the gym and I still ride my bike and I savor moments with the people I care about. And
what's the craziest thing you tried that you absolutely sucked at?
Well, I wasn't that good at aerial silks, I'll tell you that.
No.
Oh,
I can't imagine I would be either.
Yes. And I have to say, I don't know that this was crazy, but I used to be a dancer growing up, and I took Bollywood dancing, and I thought I would be so great at it. You know, I just love the energy behind Bollywood. It's so energetic. And so I did a self video in class, and you know, you think you look awesome when you're in the midst of it. And then you go back and watch the video and you're like, oh my God. Why didn't anyone tell me? But again, what it comes down to is showing up and having fun.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah, showing up, having fun. You know, if we could just be gentler with ourselves and enjoy our experiences. Limiting beliefs, you know, let's talk about that. Limiting beliefs. I know that you're all about removing limiting beliefs. Now, is there like one ridiculous limiting belief that you had about yourself that you've managed to overcome or that doesn't show up as often?
Well, I'm actually in the midst of one right now. So maybe I'll talk about that a little bit. I'm actually working through it right now. Following my divorce, I bought my own home it's the first time I've owned a home on my own. And I think I still struggle with, how can I do this? How can I possibly do this on my own? Like, I can't, like, the toilet's broken, or how am I going to pay the bills? Like, there's all these thoughts coming in, or, you know, the stairs are really hard on me now. Like, and yet here I am, I don't know, 4 or 5 months later, and I'm doing it. I'm doing it. So I think that's to be continued. And again, I'm starting to redirect my focus, which I think is key. Is, okay, am I going to focus on the broken toilet? Or am I going to focus on, oh my gosh, I have my own space and I get to decorate it the way I want? and I have a lovely patio and I can plant all my plants and flowers and, the list goes on. So where am I going to put my focus, right?
Yeah, that's great. So, Risa, we've been talking for over an hour now, and I feel like we could just keep going.
I agree.
But I do want to ask you a couple things. So, going forward, let's say that Hollywood made a movie about your life. Who would you want to play you, and what would you want the movie to say?
Well, as far as my Hollywood lookalikes, I've been told Demi Moore and Jennifer Connelly. It definitely has to be someone earthy, though, and a little bit sassy and rebellious. And I don't know if that would be Jennifer Garner, or I'm not sure. Yeah, that's a great question. But ultimately, I feel like this is a generic answer, and I'm not sure how to articulate this more fully, but to really inspire and motivate other people to go out there and do that thing. And it doesn't have to be an 1,800-mile journey. It could be a cooking class, or taking that trip you always wanted to take, but just going out there and living life more fully.
Get off the couch and live. Get out of those gray sweats.
Yes.
Get your butt out there and live, for goodness sakes.
Exactly. Burn the sweatpants.
Who do you want to be a hero to in your life right now and going forward?
Yeah, my apologies. I feel tears coming up around this.
Well, you withheld them the whole interview, and this is absolutely a tier okay zone. So,
thank you. Yeah, I don't think I have an exact answer to that question. What I do know is that I've had people reach out to me from around the world and tell me how much my book inspired them, or gave them hope, or motivated them to go do that thing. And so I guess I want to continue to speak to those people that need that message, that need to hear that, so that they can get motivated or inspired to go out and live.
I love that. So, last question. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wish I would have?
Maybe what's next for me? What's next
for you?
I'm hoping to write I'm planning to write, I'm going to change my wording around that. I'm planning to write my second book, and I want to keep doing incredible things. I have my sights set on they're called bike and boat tours, where you take a cruise, but you get to bike in between ports. And, because my life and body's changing again. So I'm starting to look at, okay, I can still do awesome things, because they're going to look a little different now. And I'm still going to continue to learn and grow and find more and more ways to continue living fully. And I'm going to say fully unleashed. So without my own constraints and limitations, I'm going to continue to live unleashed.
Fantastic. Risa August, you are an inspiration, and I am so grateful for the time that you shared with me today. Everyone needs to run out and grab your book. But tell me, where will my listeners find out more about you? Where should they go to find out everything that you do and get more inspiration and motivation?
Oh my gosh, thank you, Tony. You can go to my website. It's risaaugust.com, and that's Risa spelled with one S, and August just like the month. So risaaugust.com, and you'll find, all the things there, all my fully unleashed life.
All right. And what's the name of your book again?
The Road Unpaved, Border to Border with a Brain Tumor and a Bike.
Excellent. Now, all of those things will be linked below, depending on what platform that you're listening to this on. So I'll try and make it easy for you, but I do encourage you all to go grab Risa's book, because it is a wonderful read. And I'm looking forward to finishing it. So thank you again for being here with me today. I really appreciate you, and I can't wait to see what you do next. And tell me where to pre-order that book.
Okay. Yes.
Next one.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. And what an absolute pleasure. I loved our conversation. Thank you so much for having me, Tony.
Thank you for tuning into Hero Up. I hope today's episode challenged you to step up as a hero in your field and provided you with valuable insights to express your unique voice and message. If you found this episode helpful and motivating, please leave a review and share it with your friends and family. And remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes and amazing guests. Until next time, find your voice, share your message, live your mission.